This is Mommying While Muslim, recorded live and unedited. Watch as Zeba and Uzma record their podcast, see their reactions, and find out for yourself what all the buzz is about.
This episode of Mommyingwhilemuslim is sponsored by Guidance Residential. Join Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, president of Zaytuna College and Guidance Residential, for a live webinar on how Islamic home financing is providing a permissible path for Muslim Americans to finance their homes. Register for very limited online seats at gr.link/MWM_NCW_Hamza HAMZA_YUSUF. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mommyingwhilemuslim podcast. This is Uzma Joffrey.
And this is Zeba Hassan. I just downed some cheese fries from Portillo. So if I have cheese on my face, please let me know, because it's the only time I can have it when I'm here in Chicago.
Yeah. I remember when they came over here in Arizona and I was like, oh, Portillo's. That used to be near the neighborhood. Oh my gosh. Now I can't remember the name of the neighborhood where I stayed in Chicago when I lived there. I want to say Naperville, and that's totally wrong.
Because it would be more closer to the city.
No, it wasn't. It was still a suburb, but they had Portillo's, and I remember, if I remember correctly, they had a kosher version of a hot dog that I could eat.
Yeah, the hot dogs are kosher.
No, except in Arizona, at the franchise, they're not. So I can't eat the hot dogs out here. So I'm like, Chicago has all the kosher.
Are you kidding? Okay, sorry about that, because I hadn't eaten, and it was the beauty of recording in your parents' house is they know that you're not, and then they slide you food, so you kind of resort back to a little bit of that, back your kid thing. And like when my kids are coming up to me right now, I'm like, I'm not the mom right now. Like, you need to go
There's
somewhere
a bigger mom than me.
else.
Find her.
They're like, go find Nani. Go find Nani. No, that's how my week is going, is that I'm kind of like really absorbing all of the, the kid time and going through old pictures. We're going to be posting some of those because I found some of Uzma and her parents and us as kids. So it was just super fun. So how has your week been going?
My week has been really good. I've been reading and answering the same question over and over to everybody. Yes, my kids are still learning at home. Yes, they are fine. No, we are not going for any time in the near future back into in-person schooling. They are happy. I have so many friends who are trying, well, not so many. So many friends asking me those questions, but like a couple who are like, no, you can't do this. It's so wrong. Put them back in school. I'm like, I put them back in sports. So I did do that.
That's enough.
Right before the big surge happened, and it was like, oh crap. But I thought it was safe enough, and I thought, okay, they're getting out of shape. Let's get them back into basketball and soccer, and I think that's a good compromise. I would rather them do that than go back for 8 hours a day into a giant petri dish. So.
Oh, see, now you're making me all stressed out. But, that's where we're talking about these issues, because all moms have to make the right choices for their kids, to do what they need to do for your family. So we recognize and understand that. I do know that we might be starting we're reading this trilogy that we keep talking about because we're obsessed. So hopefully if the author hears us, we're obsessed with your trilogy. Thank you to my friend Syra Amir for introducing that to me.
Thank you, Syra Amir. Oh
thank you, Syra. So do you want to tell a little bit about the books we're reading right now?
So the Devabad trilogy is by S.A. Chakraborty, and I am in love with the writing. At first, I was very hesitant because, the books are big. And it's a series, right? So who has the time to invest when we have so many other things to do? But how did you introduce it to me? Zeba, she said it's Harry Potter meets what?
Harry Potter in the Jinn world.
Yeah.
So because we know, everybody knows about the Jinn that lives in our computers, and thankfully, I think he or she is gone.
Joe has treated that, yes. Thank you,
Joe has treated them. Yeah, exactly. But it's just one of those things where I was like, you have to read it. It's about the magic, and when you have words that you like, they talk about like prayer and adhan and like all these types of things in this mainstream. Again, it's all about representation, all about what we're about. And if we can support an author that's promoting and elevating those types of voices, and it's great reading.
Amazingly written. The
And
language,
amazingly written.
I
So
could
why
never
not
in a
support
lifetime write
it?
like that. Yeah, it's amazing, and it's one of the reasons. It's the current reason why I'm not sleeping, because I was telling
Yes.
Zeba I came home late from a girls' night, and then it was like 3 in the morning, and I still read for another hour and a half because I was like, "Oh, well, if I fall asleep now, I'm gonna miss pleasure." So, just
So
makes
you might as well
sense.
stay up,
May as well stay
get
up.
get
Love the book.
indoctrinated into the Daevabad culture, and enjoy it. But that's same thing with me. I am reading ferociously because I need to finish this before I go back, and my school starts next week. But
That's okay.
it's something that we're thinking about adding to our membership page or our Patreon, to be maybe some of these, because we're trying to acknowledge all the things and that you guys are saying, and the feedback you guys are giving us of things that you want to do, like read with us, do these types of things. And why not do it for the price of what? A coffee cup? You'll be supporting us,
$5 a
supporting our
month.
endeavor. $5 a
Yeah,
month,
cheaper than a
10 or
coffee.
20, right? 5, 10, or 20 are the three tiers that we're going to be offering, and we're going to be letting you know about that probably in September, but we're starting to talk about this now. But join us. We're super excited. We can't wait to get this in front of you guys. But that's something we learned about in our podcast conference that we want to introduce to you all. So we are very excited about unveiling our membership page come September. But I know I am interested in this particular soapbox that Uzma has to talk about today because of all the things that we keep hearing in the news. So Uzma, what is our soapbox for today?
Our soapbox is going to be, I feel like we'll be talking about it for a while, just because that's the nature of COVID, right? It's the current hot news and hasn't stopped being the current hot news for a year and a half. But we have an all-time high of pediatric COVID admissions. Right. In some states, a lot of states have started opening this week, and then it hasn't really rolled out to the East Coast yet, because I think they start later in your area, Zeba. But it's not looking good because everybody's like, chicken or the egg? Was it the schools opening that did it, or was it the natural surge that was expected from Delta? We're not sure. But what we've noticed is that there are more pediatric admissions into the hospital, including a lot of infants, guys. So that's kids under the age of 1, which is insanity. And some of these are in ICU, and some of these kiddos, infants, are intubated. That's really scary. It's like you survived all of COVID, and then freaking we think it's Delta that happened, and that's what's going on. But one of the trends that we do know is that states with active mask bans in schools have the highest rates of pediatric admissions. So I'm really sad that yet again my home state is making the top story there. Texas, come on, man, you can do better. Bear in mind that the southeastern United States is sorely behind our targeted 70% vaccination rate in adults. Southeastern Americans are not doing that for a multitude of reasons. There's marginalized communities as well because of, you know, a history of experimentation on their bodies. They obviously don't have a trust of it. And then there's, the disinformants, that contingency. So because there's a lower rate of adult vaccinations in those areas, we think that's why pediatric admissions with COVID are going up. Remember that, the kids who can get vaccinated right now are 12 and older. Well, these admissions that are happening, while they're 1.5 to 3.5% of all COVID admissions right now, um, it's the kids that are under 12 that are the highest risk because they don't even get a chance to get the vaccine. So because we mentioned Delta, remember that it's not that it's worse than Alpha in terms of what it can do, but what we know is it's more transmissible. It's just highly infectious. So those kids under 12 who cannot legally get the vaccine right now, it's not available to them, they're at higher risk for getting that. And we think that's what's happening and resulting in these higher admissions because the adults around them have not provided that herd immunity that we were relying upon. So, we're not asking anybody to take a bullet for your kid, because I know everybody and their mama says they're going to take a bullet for their kid. No, we just want you to take the shot, take the vaccine to protect these vulnerable populations under the age of 12. Because obviously in the last year, we couldn't convince you to take care of the vulnerable populations who are older and still continue to die. I signed a death certificate this morning for somebody who died of COVID at 85 years old because their family you know, didn't want to take the shot, take it for your kids then, all right? This week we have 239 pediatric admissions with COVID, which doesn't sound like a lot in the United States. And yes, certainly it's less than 1% of all of our COVID cases. But, that's 239 children. That's 239 moms who are unnecessarily suffering. And for Zeba and me, if that was one child that was admitted, that's one child too many, because we believe that all kids are our kids and all moms are our mom sisters. And we're going to stand with you where we know better. We all know better. And we're asking each and every one of us to do better. That's our soapbox for today.
I mean, I got to tell you, I am a little bit nervous about it as my kids are about to go into school. And like you said, I have two that are not vaccinated just because they cannot be. And it's just something that we all kind of have to do together. And, if I can't wear lipstick in public for a little bit longer, I'm okay with that. So I am willing to, put my mask on and take the shot or take the bullet, though I would take a bullet for my kids, and you know that I would. So why not do what the minimum that we can do to help our kids? But now I'm just going to segue into, continuing this month's news series, Muslims in News, because, it's something that I love and super passionate about. And I always used to pretend to be a news anchor. Like before we had like TikTok and all that kind of stuff, we had those big bulky camcorders, and I would sit in front of them and be like, oh my God, I'm telling you that it was always the weather. Like, why? I don't know.
I made music videos.
You did music videos, I did the weather, and we're meeting so many amazing Muslim mom journalists, whether they're on camera, whether they're producing, whether they're writing things. And honestly, if you haven't listened to last week, it's one of my really good friends, Layla Alarian. I had no idea what a Peabody is, but she's won an Emmy and a Peabody. And no, she is not ESL. So guess what? She won both for journalism, and I'm proud to know her. And now I'm actually honored to introduce to you Nargis Rahman. She has a degree in journalism from Wayne State University, Detroit, Detroit, Midwest. We're in the house. She specializes in community journalism. We're going to ask her a little bit about that. Her goal is to give American Muslims and minorities a voice in the press, and we thank her. And that's always music to our ears, because we're all about representation and elevating the voices of American Muslims. She is a reporter for the Documentaries program, a former fellow at the South Asian American Digital Archives. That's SADA for the people that don't know. That's SAADA. So look that up, archival creators. You're going to hear, I was going to salivate over this one, because be prepared, because she loves her. Her work has been printed in multiple publications, and she is here to tell us how she does it and why she does it. Welcome, Nargis, and we are so excited to have you on the show here today. Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome.
Walaikum salam. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So we usually kick it off by asking our guests to tell us their mom story, whatever you're comfortable sharing about you and your kids, and then your momming philosophy.
Yeah, so I'm a mom of 3 kids, 11, 8 and a half, and a new 6-year-old. So my mom philosophy is wing it. Embrace whatever comes, the phase, whatever problems. And I've learned the hard way that everything is winging it, and you just have to do that gracefully.
I am so glad that you learned that. Like, it sounds like you learned it early. It took me a long, long time in my momming career to be like, nobody knows what they're doing. Yeah, I think one of my closest friends was like, no, there's not a manual. There's not one book. You just figure it out as you go along. I'm like, they could have told us this before they started pressuring us to have the babies. Like, there's no manual. You just kind of jump in and swim. For those of us, who don't know how to swim, that is very terrifying. So, tell us a little bit about your family background and how you ended up in journalism, particularly in community journalism.
Yeah, so I'm actually Bangladeshi American. I was born in Bangladesh. I came to the United States with my parents as a 2-year-old, so I don't remember a lot. But we came in 1989, so that gives you an idea of, it's been a while. All my siblings were born here. So I'm the oldest of 5, And, we were just a typical immigrant family trying to figure it out, assimilate, hold on to the culture as much as possible. We started off in New York and then lived in Florida for 8.5 years. At the time, we didn't have any family there. We were just there to survive. It was, just off the back of the Gulf War. My dad was just looking for a job and a new place to stay. So we left our family in New York and just started life all over again in Florida. But the Muslim community really embraced our family and helped us along, held our hand, and kind of just showed us around in terms of integrating with that community. I lived in Temple Terrace, which is just right off the border of Tampa. And we also had a very diverse neighborhood. So, everyone was different from each other, but it was like the beauty was in that. When I was 12, we moved to Michigan, and Michigan, when I remember the first day going to school, I was like, wow, there's people that look like me. There's people that wear hijab. There's like other Bengalis. And I used to joke, when I was younger, I'd always say, I was born in Bangladesh. That was my standout, unique thing, I guess, right? But when I came to Michigan, that line didn't work anymore. So I went to school, and I was like, I was born in Bangladesh, and everybody's like, yes, so was I. Good for you. Congratulations. And I didn't know anything about my culture besides whatever basic stuff that we held on to at home with our parents, like speaking Bangla and eating Bangladeshi food. Other than that, we were very integrated in the very South Asian, we grew up around a lot of Indians, Pakistanis, Jordanians, Palestinians. So we didn't really know what it meant to be Bangladeshi, really. We were one of the only families that went to the masjid at that time, back in the 90s. And now I got an opportunity to visit in 2019 because we don't have family. So we just impromptu went to the masjid, just kind of poked around looking for my Quran teacher. Found her, successfully found her. And she was telling me that there's a lot of Bangladeshi families now in that area, which is amazing to hear. But we ended up in Michigan, and it was a culture shock for me. Being Muslim, being Bengali, being a woman, like trying to figure out who I was. How do I fit into the space? What does that mean? But one thing I always loved is writing. I feel like I've always enjoyed writing. Florida is very, very big on it. So they integrate writing and speech like very early on in elementary school. So I knew I wanted to be a journalist, maybe around like 7th grade, but I didn't really know what that meant. So I feel like it was one of those things like, when kids say, I want to grow up to be a doctor. It's like I kind of, after saying that until I was like 10 years old, realized I'm not really going to do that. But knowing that I wanted to be a journalist, but not understanding what it really meant, and just really loving to tell stories or write about experiences that I've had. And then when I went in high school, we didn't have a lot of, we did have some journalism classes, and I was like the editor, but it wasn't like hardcore journalism. It was just like high school level, like, oh, hey, this little event happened or this little thing happened. But I went to a bunch of engineering summer camps, actually. And so, my parents thought I was going to go into that track. And I did this engineering camp right before college started. It was like a pre-engineering, integrating you into college type of thing. And as soon as I saw that project, like build a modifying thing to help elderly people who might not know how to, or who cannot hold an object by themselves. I was like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. So I was like, I'll take the essay and I'll take the PowerPoint. Everyone else, you guys figure it out. And after that camp, I went and changed my major to journalism. And I was like, YOLO, whatever. It's so good. So that's how I ended up in journalism. And I did the same thing, like just kind of walked into the South End, which is our student newspaper, and said, hey, I want to write. I don't know what I'm doing, but if someone can show me around and kind of tell me what to do, I'll figure it out from there. So that's how I ended up in journalism, which is a pretty funny story. And then there was a great program at Wayne State called the Journalism Institute for Media Diversity, which embraces people like me. And it's an honors program, so you have to keep your grades up. And another thing you have to do is internships every semester. So you're really like integrated into the journalism world as much as possible as a student. And then I stepped away from journalism for a while because of course, the newspaper industry was just, crumbling by the time we were graduating. So a lot of people went into PR or they went into nonprofit work. And so I actually did the latter. I worked in nonprofit for 5 years so I could raise my kids. They were really little at the time. So it just ended up being a really good fit. I was an office manager, and which really means you do it like pretty much anything that comes your way, including writing. So I would do the newsletter, the annual banquet, all kinds of fun stuff. And I just feel like it was a great experience to learn about that whole world of nonprofit. And then after a while, I just felt like my kids are starting to get a little older and the itch came back, right? I have to write. I have to go back to that passion and my calling. And I used to say, like, I'm not an ambitious person. Like, that's not my thing. I'm a family person. I have to be there for my kids. I used to be like kind of hard on myself about that. And I don't think it was only that I was hard on myself. It was just the realities of mothering sometimes that you have to embrace the phase that you're going through. And like Zeba said, like no one tells you, or Uzma said, like no one tells you like, hey, it's okay. You can just wing it. You don't have to like know it all or figure it all out at one time. It really felt like that. Like some things I felt like I kept hitting a wall, like it didn't feel right. Like I can't do this because my toddler's crying in the background. Is it really worth letting her cry the whole time while I'm doing this interview? Because that's just going to spike my anxiety. Or do I just give it a couple years and maybe this kid just needs a little more attention and, well, once she's situated or once I hate when people say like once they're in school, do X, Y, Z or when they're sleeping, because that doesn't work. You still need a plan. You still need some sort of plan. I think I didn't have a plan per se. I just always felt like whenever I could participate in something in the journalism or writing world, I naturally started gravitating to that. I'm like, okay, let me just like peek into that. Or like, if I could go to this one event, maybe I'll meet somebody who needs a writer. And at this point, I really just thought like, no one wants me because I don't have any clips anymore. I'm not writing under my name anymore. So how am I going to do this? So I kept like poking around and trying to volunteer write for places, and like nobody wanted like a random person like, hey, I'll give you free writing skills. But eventually there was for Metro Detroit Mommy, she took a chance on me. And I was like, hey, I'm a former journalist and I can write whatever you want. I just need some clips. And she was so gracious to give me that chance. I'm so appreciative to her. But I wrote about like Ramadan, like what is Ramadan? Here are 5 things to know. It was like some basic thing. And at that point I was pretty rusty, right? So I was very like nervous about it. And that opened the door for me to then start writing for Brown Girl magazine. And then I started writing for under parenting. And I'm like, nobody wants to know how I parent. I don't even know what I'm doing. But it actually like does resonate because they want to know how you're doing whatever you're doing, even if it's not right or. So that's how I ended up back in the writing space slowly. And then I put my kids in. I took the chance of putting my kid into daycare, the youngest, and I said, okay, now I need to like slowly get back into full time and like start figuring out what I want to do next. And I just felt like that itch kept growing, like I have to do something more, but I don't know what. So I was doing that. And then I started working as a program coordinator at Detroit Medical Center. Really randomly, I applied for an admin job, thought it was like a foot in the door for something else. I was overqualified, so they were like, here you go, here's a program coordinator job instead. And I was like, okay, but I didn't know anything about medical education. I didn't even know what my titles meant, like whatever coordinator, whatever fellowship I was in charge of. I figured I'll figure it out, right? So I'm there, and then while I was there, like I had some downtime to just think, right? And I'm like, okay, well, since I'm really removed from this journalism world, what is something that I can do that is not full-time or part-time? Maybe I can just brush up on some skills that I don't have anymore or need some brushing up on. So a friend of mine from our journalism institute, she's Pakistani American. She was a journalist. She worked as a journalist then, and then she started doing communications. She sent this fellowship for a food writing journalism fellowship at the local radio station, WDET. And I was like, wow, I love food and I love to write. So how do I put those two things together? I was like, okay, this is really cool and really exciting. It sounds quirky. I was like, I'll sign up. And it was really like a moment in my life where I felt like I have nothing to lose. My kids are just old enough that I can kind of figure out where to put them. Like they're not really in diapers anymore. It's not as difficult to just drop them off at grandma's or something, like it's a lot easier to take care of them. And I was kind of open-minded to like hustling them with me wherever I needed to, if that was, necessary. So I was like in that reflective moment of the year of yes, like Shonda Rhimes, like, yeah, just say yes, it's okay. And up until that moment, I really felt like I used to say, well, you're a mom, you can't like take on a fellowship and a full-time job and 3 kids in school. But I was like, well, how do I know like that I'm even gonna get the fellowship, right? I was like, let me just try. If I get it, I'll figure it out. And I had other moms like prepare me for that moment and say, well, once you get there, everyone will adjust to it. Like I needed to hear that. So, and then when I got the fellowship, I was like, get out. Really? You want to hear what I have to say about this? Oh, cool. And in this moment also, what I realized is a lot of people who stayed in journalism, worked at the dailies, and did the grind were coming away from that because they were tired of not hearing minority representation and wanted to have more inclusive voices and pick and choose what stories they get to write versus being told what to write about. And I've always kind of felt like that as a minority, obviously, like, hey, why can't I talk about stories that I wanted to talk about or things that I've experienced? Because we were always told it was bias and we were not allowed to write about our communities. But and now in this moment, the journalism world has changed so much that people are much more open-minded to that. And so when I say I want to write about minorities, it's like that's a possibility. Versus like you can't be on that beat because you're a minority. So I did this food journalism fellowship and radio, and I have a print background, so I didn't know anything about being on radio. And we were kind of taught that and figuring it out along the way. And over that experience, the women that I met through that fellowship, there was 4 of us from different backgrounds. We all really clicked, and they honestly were so gracious and just like saying, here's a freelance writing opportunity. Why don't you do this? Or why don't you write about that? Or, hey, we want someone to write about Bangladeshi food, but none of us are Bengali. So like, maybe you can take that up. And I was very much like, oh, well, I don't really know how to do this, but okay, I'll try, I guess. But we kind of just uplifted each other and they uplifted me. And after doing freelance for many years, now I'm working at WDT where I do this fellowship as a reporter. So full circle moment.
I love that. That's awesome.
I love that. And that's, something I think for our audience to know specifically that there's no right way to get to where you need to be, right? You took a couple of detours, you figured it out, you go, but you still had that undercurrent passion that I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And I tell this to my kids all the time, where I have my oldest getting ready for college, and he's like, if I don't get into this and this and this, and I'm like, you know what? There's multiple paths to ultimately get you where you need to go. And perhaps you are one of those that had to go in a different route to get to where you need to be.
I think that being a mom doesn't
about that.
Yeah, I think that being a mom, you're not prepared for all those U-turns until you're there. I think that's another thing you don't learn about parenting. You think like, okay, I'll nurse them, and by the time give a couple of years, you'll adjust to it. But then when you have another kid, then what? You just don't know what that situation is going to look like at any given moment. So even with being employed, it's okay to work part-time or not to work for a couple, months or years. It's okay to work full-time. Being, graceful to yourself even about that process, that you don't have to do it a certain way and chase everything at the same time. It'll happen when it's meant to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, each of us just figures out that right balance of how busy is busy enough and how busy is not too busy for your kids and your family and for, the platter full of other dreams that you've got. So you mentioned talking about minority voices and minority bias, reporting on minorities. You're working really hard to elevate that Muslim story and tell it from the Muslim point of view. But like, as a listener of news, as somebody who writes news, Is there anything that you've ever seen from within the Muslim community reports that's just cringeworthy? Like, oh man, like I wish that this wasn't true, but it really is. Or this could have been presented in like several different other ways or tracks, but it wasn't done because maybe whoever was doing it didn't do it justice, or maybe was going along the same patterns of reporting that we see in mainstream news. Any cringeworthy moments in Muslim news?
That's a good question. I think that let's say 10 years ago, it was very cliche. Muslim news was just community news, right? So and so opened a business or
The
something, and
halal butcher shop, that's the big
this is where they this is where they're from and from whatever country they're from. And it was very like basic. And I
yeah.
think that now what I see the trends, well, first of all, I want to say that people are doing a phenomenal job of being in that space and telling amazing stories. And I feel like a lot of these writers are women, which is like makes me so proud that we've been able to crack into the space. But also, what I see is the element of storytelling is like it's a unique skill, right? And it's something you don't just wake up and have. You have to hone that skill. But I really like those stories that you're talking about Muslims, but people don't really even know they're Muslim. They're just part of the narrative. I like those stories, but I also like the stories that are very Muslim. And it's like, yeah, it's about time we talk about this in a very matter of fact way, and we don't have to explain and sugarcoat everything anymore because we're just taking that leap of faith that it's just going to work out. I'll give you an example. So, during COVID, actually, I saw locally there wasn't a lot of coverage about mosques. What are mosques doing during COVID closures? How are they handling Ramadan? Where we do see stories about churches and we might have seen stories about synagogues or temples, we haven't seen that many stories about mosques. So I did some digging and I said, that doesn't really sit well with me. And then I also thought about which mosques get covered in the news. The ones with the well-spoken speakers at their masjids, people who already are familiar with media folks or comfortable with them. Maybe it's a local organization that has a Muslim president or ED or something like that. So I always ask myself, who needs that coverage more? Is it those big mosques or is it those smaller inner city mosques that no one really knows about and doesn't understand how much they're really suffering? So like not only are they suffering because of COVID, but they're suffering because they don't have updated technology. They're suffering because they're people who come to the masjid are elderly folks who speak another language and might not even sign into Zoom for the extra Quran class that you set up online now, or don't have access to internet, or that's their only space to socialize with other Muslims. So keeping those things in mind, and I think that comes from growing up in these inner city cities and going through those experiences and understanding that side of it, but also then moving out of those cities and seeing the other side of it, of how it can work really well. So there was a story like that I did for Michigan Radio on a freelance basis, and mashallah, like it got an award,
Oh,
and
mashallah.
I did not see that coming, but it was like while I'm humble that I got an award for it, I was also like, well, we should have been talking about this anyways. That's kind of how I
Being
felt
awarded for
about that.
doing my job. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, and we should have been talking about Muslims in the big picture anyways, because we're here. So that's kind of what I've been seeing. And I'll say something about the most cringeworthy coverage I've seen is when there's an AP news story that's recycled in a newsroom, when there's literally local communities from the Muslim community that you could easily, quote or interview and get a story out of.
Mhm. I didn't realize that was that common that stories got recycled. But it
It's
just means
it's like the AP news will just say like, "Hey, Eid was declared in Saudi Arabia today, so there's lots of people celebrating it all over the world."
yeah.
And I'm like, "Well, what about the local communities that live here and can tell you about it?"
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. I feel like, especially during COVID, that was like an excuse for people, right? That's when I started noticing. I was like, wait a minute, this story is dated from like a couple of years ago. Why did that happen?
Yeah.
Because I know news is still happening. I mean, it's freaking COVID. But Eid especially got the short end of the stick in the past year. even this year, I don't think there was like great mainstream coverage of it. I was surprised that Muslims weren't talking about it. I just assumed it was because Muslims don't want to talk about Eid because they feel like, it's the mainstream job to talk about or to ask questions about something they don't know about. But now I'm hearing a different side of it. That's really interesting to me. So, everything that you're saying about like the mosque stories and even the cringeworthy element, the community journalism aspect, can you expound on that? Because I think even when we think journalism, we think of like, I don't know, Christiana Amanpour or, somebody writing at like a big desk. Like it has to be national or global. But what you're talking about, like at the grassroots level, as grassroots workers, Zeba and I know that you can make such huge headway um, just to the grassroots level. So community journalism and its importance, especially in minority communities. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, like growing up in Hamtramck, where I lived in Michigan for many years until I moved into the suburbs. We've always heard coverage of Muslims or Bangladeshis, even those poor people, those poor South Asians from South Asia, and they came here and they're all poor and they all need help. And like the only thing we did right is like we opened some businesses on like the main street or whatnot. So that really got to me, and I was like, why? Like there has to be some positive stories that our community is doing right that is not being covered. And why is it not being covered? It's because we're like super minority, right? Like we're so down the chain that like no one's gonna notice. It also bothered me that women were not being covered. And as a woman, I could say, yeah, hey, maybe there's not enough women speaking in public spaces. They don't want to. But also, as a reporter, I'm thinking, well, have the reporters been asking to speak to the women? Have they been doing their due diligence? Do they know people they can ask and like poke around? And I also had this theory that if you're a woman, you can ask for other women. But if you're not really like in that space, then it's hard for people to trust you because we don't trust the media very easily. Because sometimes when we trust the media, they get it wrong. So for me, it's like, what is it that I don't see in the media, and how do I make people feel seen and heard? Because that's something on a fundamental level I would want for myself. And so I challenge myself in saying, it's really important to show what the community is doing because that's where you show the growth. But when you keep recycling the same narratives, then you don't realize that there is growth. You don't know where it is. And it requires like really paying attention, keeping your eyes and ears open, living some of those experiences. Like there's certain things like I couldn't relate to until I went through them, right? Like being a mom, like you don't know what it really is like until you're in those shoes and experiencing it. So community journalism really means like instead of just reporting like, hey, there's an event or here's this carnival that's happening, here's some folks that I spoke to, it's like, well, why is that carnival happening? Who put it together? And what are those people going through, or how did they get to this point? What was the backstory of that? I love the stories that are those under like the radar. Nobody really knows about them. They don't even think they're, newsworthy. And so a lot of times I have to say like, hey, you have a great story and you should tell me about it. And people will say like, well, first of all, I don't know about you. I don't know who you are. What do you want from me? And second of all, no, I really don't have a story. And I'll say, you absolutely do. Like you need to tell me more because your very everyday basic story is so relatable to so many people. And we don't always have to be some big shot in the community for people to like learn about our stories and benefit from it. And I think as a minority too, we have this sense of like, we have to pull everyone up too. Like you can't just be like in your shoes. You have to also pull people up. And I believe that too. So I think that's where the community journalism element comes. Like I can't just be writing about people. Like I need to write about people who need people to know who they are because they're doing like this, honorable work on the DL. Like they need some sort of they don't want the coverage, but why not, right? Like it's going to show and highlight the different aspects of our community. You don't have to be a one size fit all person to be in the news.
I really like that. That is like so our love language, right, Zeba?
It's definitely our love language because, you know, it's the quote unquote normal lay person that's really the heart and the soul of the community. So the fact that you're giving them a platform, you're elevating them, you're shining a light on them really helps, I think, lift them up. And like you said, we love lifting people up. And why not lift the people up that are the basic fundamental foundational pieces of our community. So, the one thing that I've been really curious about is what is one of the best or the story that you have covered that you still think about today.
It's one of my favorite stories, and it was actually the one I did for the fellowship. I wrote about a restaurant. It's called Bismillah Kebab. And for anyone who's listening, you probably are thinking like, okay, there's probably halal food there and there's kebabs, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty much what we get from that. But this restaurant is like in the middle of Warren. And a lot of people move from like Hamtramck, Detroit into Warren, Sterling Heights, Troy area, and Michigan once they kind of make it on their feet, and they want to do a little bit better in life, or they want to put their kids in better schools, and now they can afford like 2 cars and they're able to kind of figure it out. So a lot of times when we see communities like moving into the suburbs, you'll see the grocery stores and like the restaurants have to come along. In the Bangladeshi communities, the restaurants are really not just restaurants, they're community centers. And what I've seen about this particular restaurant is that, when it first opened, it was just a hole in the wall restaurant. Like we would just go there to get halal burgers. That was it. And we would only pick up, we wouldn't I wouldn't sit there and eat because I was like, oh, this is like a dude space, like this is people just come here to eat and they just leave. But then over like 5 years later, when I was writing this story, it occurred to me that they had done all these renovations and then people were gathering there. It was before COVID. So there was lots of people coming in and there were like meetings, association meetings or like cricket team. And families were coming and sitting. There were small like nikahs and weddings happening. And I was so amazed by that. And then one year the Embassy of Bangladesh showed up for a mobile consular service. And I was like, wow, what are they doing at this restaurant? I was like, that's kind of funny. And it's also really cool. Like they came to this restaurant out of all places. And they usually come to like the Hamtramck area where most of the people who need the services live. So that sparked my interest. And then I wanted to like tell the story of how this restaurant is more than a restaurant. It's literally a lifeline for the community. And then people started moving into the neighborhoods because of this restaurant, like buying up property around that area. And then a grocery shop opened, and then an accounting spot, and then a mosque across the street, and then a pharmacy across the street. So really the community just started like growing around this restaurant and it became a center point. But then when I talked to the owners, which I love this, like he was kind of like unfazed and unaware of all these happenings. And I was telling him like, so what made you open this restaurant? He's like, I just wanted some halal food. I just needed a place to eat. Yeah, I just needed to eat lunch somewhere, and I didn't have anywhere to eat lunch, so I just decided to grab a couple of my pals. He was also a Quran teacher, like on the weekends, so
of course he was.
I just told some of the parents, and then we all pooled our resources, and then decided to open the spot. And I was like, what a genuine, down to earth, like story. Like, wow, like that's so nonchalant. He has no idea. He's like this big. He's having this big impact. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then, so yeah, that was really funny. And now like they're doing so many amazing things and they're just a staple in the community. And so people will tell me like, I heard your Bismillah kebab story. And I never knew what that was before, but that story will always hold a special spot in my heart, I think.
I love that story. And it's just so, subhanAllah, I know when he opened it as Bismillah Kebab, he's acting surprised, but I think like Bismillah for us is a catalyst for everything, right? Because like we start all of our actions with that, and subhanAllah, like all the barakah or all of the good came as a result of that one word, I think. And may Allah reward him, his business, and now I have a place to go have halal kebabs and burgers, which is way more important when I go to Detroit, inshallah. So that's awesome. So I have to know, because yes, I have been salivating, the Sada Project. Since we're talking about community stories and why they're important, the Sada Project has a special place in my heart because as a geriatrician and as somebody who started a Muslim geriatric kind kind of club organization locally, this is something that we really, really want to do because it is so important. So can you talk about this as well? Because this was also an award winner for you. So I would really like for you to tell the audience about Sada, the inspiration, and the work.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sada kind of was sent over to me by like a fellow writer, documentary filmmaker friend. He just kind of sent it to me along the way, like you might be interested in this. So Sada is a online digital archive, and the whole goal is to uplift South Asian voices because we don't have historians writing about South Asians in America, right? And if you think about an archive, you'll probably think of a library, and then you have to go dig up some boxes, and then ask the librarian for special permission to like maybe copy a page. But it's not really accessible to a lot of people unless you are looking for that in that particular space. So the whole idea behind it is to preserve as many stories as we can, and it's grant funded, which is amazing. So what Sada does is they have a fellowship, which is last year they had 6, the year before they had 3, and this year they'll be taking on 9 fellows to find stories in their own communities. And there's this element of community support. So you, as a fellow, would go and say, hey, I want to write about, or I want to interview 10 people about some sort of topic that's underserved or underreported in the South Asian diaspora. And these are the people I'm going to interview. But then you have an advisory committee from your community that supports your work, and you talk to them about it and say, hey, who should I interview? What are some things I should, capture in my interviews? And then essentially it's this community effort to uplift these voices. So it's not just you like getting the stories, but it's also showcasing it to your own community and then on this global archive that anyone can access. And literally people from all over the world listen to these stories. And so when I was interviewing some of these people, I would say, if, in 100 years, someone found your story, what is it that you would want them to know about you? That's kind of how we presented it. And then you also get to do a community event and exhibit that people can come onto that page and then kind of learn about your project overall. So I focused on Bangladeshi women entrepreneurs, very much because of some of the things I had mentioned before, not seeing representation locally. And, oftentimes when there was representation, it was about the restaurants and grocery shops that opened. But really, those shops were owned by men, or men were the public faces of those, businesses. So I realized, like, I know there's women behind these, things. So where are they? And let's find them, and let's find women who are entrepreneurs. They don't have to have a brick and mortar. So my whole idea was celebrating entrepreneurship and meeting people where they are. So whether they're doing business from home or they're doing an online shop, and what are these services they provide. And what I found through my oral histories is that everyone was struggling. Everyone wanted to provide a service that they didn't have growing up. And they also wanted to give back to the community. That was a huge element of their business. I came up with my story ideas, and it was very humbling and so amazing to see all these women then come together at the end and meet each other and be able to say wow, we're all doing this cool stuff in the community, but we haven't really come together in this common way. We never had this it's not that a label per se, but there wasn't this consensus of who these women are. They're just who they are on their own. But then to be able to be referred to this Bangladeshi women entrepreneurs, I feel gave a new element of inspiration to all of them. And they're so geeked, they're so inspired beyond this project. I'm inspired by them to do something else and do something more. There's this energy that I feel came out of this. And I can't wait to see what comes of it. I feel it wasn't just these stories to come. So, and I feel women entrepreneurship in the South Asian community is growing in itself. And I feel it's so important to capture that trend while it's happening. And that also encourages more people to do that.
I love that, and I love that you're doing that because we need as much representation as possible, and why not represent somebody within your own community? And here at Mommyingwhilemuslim, we are always about elevating the voices of women because what like to say, there's behind every powerful man there's a woman, and behind every powerful woman there's a team of other women helping to uplift and elevate her. That's just the truth of it. So I want to ask you, for all these moms that are thinking, that had this passion in the back, thinking, oh my gosh, maybe I should have done something else, or how is it? Like, maybe you wanted to be a writer or a reporter. What does a day in the life of Nargis Rahman look like for those moms that are thinking, maybe I wanted to do something else in my life?
Well, I think that burning passion will eventually catch up. So if you're hoping it'll go away, it won't. That's the first thing I'll tell you. So embrace that feeling and sit with it. I honestly feel like sometimes we run away from our own truths, and sometimes like we have to own that Allah gave us special talents, and not because of anything else, that more than that's your responsibility, that for some reason he gave you that talent, and you have to figure out why and what are you supposed to do with that. You can't keep running away from it. And whether that's raising your children at home, or and being homeschooling your kids, or whether that means becoming a writer or a doctor or a counselor, eventually Allah will lead you up to that point, and he will take you through it if you really believe that, and you have that conviction that it will happen for you in due time when it's meant for you. And I really strongly believe that. And I think that really pulled me through all those years when I kind of doubted, like, where am I going with this? What's going to happen? I was like, I'm never going to be in journalism world again. But subhanAllah, like, I thank Allah so much for these opportunities that have come up, because it's really just putting one foot in front of the other and believing that it'll take you somewhere else. And I think that honestly, it's just always doing the baby steps, like when your kids are little. And I've heard this from other moms that I interviewed that are also businesswomen, that do what makes sense for you, first of all, and don't worry about what other people are doing or what other people in your career are doing, or whether or not they have these big baller jobs and like big titles and things like that. Just do what makes sense for you. So whether that means just writing a journal every day and just keeping up with the skill, or freelancing, which gives you the freedom to pick a project, do it at your own pace, within a deadline, and then slowly build your way. You can do that too. Like, there's no wrong way to do it. And now the freelance world is so expansive that you don't have to be a writer, reporter to write anymore. You can pitch stories to different publications. You can join groups that will have like-minded people, and I feel like that's important too, like being around people that understand where you're coming from. So if you want to be an artist, like, start joining artist groups, network with people who understand where you're coming from and vibe with you, and then start asking questions. Like, honestly, I feel like we don't live in a world of mentors anymore. Like, you really have to make your own mentors and ask people to mentor you. You just do. That's just the way it is. So I jokingly would tell people, like, so you're going to hire me, right? Like, you're going to give me a job, right? And so, subhanAllah, some of those things have actually worked themselves out. And like, I honestly said it as a joke, but also like, yeah, that's where I'm working toward, right? Like, that's my goal. And having goals, like having something that you're looking forward to, like maybe your goal is becoming a writer. Have a 10-year plan, but don't be afraid of having the 3-year U-turn, right? Like, it's okay if you have the 3-year U-turn or the gap years, and then coming back and saying, alhamdulillah for what I could do in those times, and alhamdulillah for where I'm at now, and alhamdulillah for wherever I'll be taken, and being open-minded to that. Like, when an opportunity comes up, weighing out the pros and cons and just jumping and going for it. I think that's like the best advice I can give. Like, not to be afraid of, taking a chance. And you can always say no later if it doesn't work for you. Like, not being afraid of that. And something that's really empowered me is just flat out telling people, like, yeah, I have 3 kids. So you're gonna get me as, on this project, but this package, the package comes with the kids. and the fevers and the, wrenches in the schedule and late nights, and maybe I'll need double time to work on things, but I'll get the job done. You just have to trust me. And I feel like the strength in moms is that you don't have time to waste. So you're going to work extra hard, even if it's time crunches. So in some situations, I would wake up really early in the morning and just work while the kids are sleeping. And my kids have sixth sense. Like they'll still wake up and come,
100%.
come touch me, make sure
The
I'm
milk
there.
has moved. Where did it go?
Yeah, where'd it go? Exactly. Find me in the house, even if it's like 5 a.m. And some nights I just work really late. Sometimes I'll just sit in their room. So they'll be in bed and I'll be sitting at the desk and doing my work. So they see me and I just keep doing my work. And other times working while they're at school, there's times I've taken my kids to interviews. I'm like, hey, I'm a mom. Here's a kid. They'll stay out of the way. They're just observing. And I want the kids to embrace that it's okay for mom to work and it's okay for her to figure it out as she goes. Like, you're not always going to have a babysitter. You're not always going to have grandparents. You're not always going to have somebody to help you, but it's okay as long as, they're more exposed to those spaces. They'll know how to act for, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
And I think it's good training for the public at large to normalize children in the workplace, because obviously our government has done nothing for childcare. So, if we want to stay in the workforce, there are accommodations that have to be made. And I was just having this discussion with a bunch of doc moms who they're like, if you have to tap out for a sick kid, you can get in trouble because people will say, well, pick your kids or pick your career. It's like, you don't say that to anybody else in any other field. Why would you expect that of any mom? Obviously, I take issue with the fact that the kids are expected to go with the mom to the work, but nobody ever expects them to go with the dad. But that's a whole nother podcast, as Zeba would say. But I really appreciate your insight and the tips for, I would say, not just aspiring mom journalists, but also our children. And I think all of that is really good to set your terms and stick by your rules, and certainly to answer the call of your passion, because Allah has put it there for a reason. And that's my favorite part of everything that you said. It is a duty upon us to utilize every single skill Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us. And he gave us more than our uterus. Our uterus is one tool in our toolbox that as mothers we are using. And there's so much more in there. And Nargis on our team now is encouraging every mom out there to fulfill all of your potentials. It's not going to all happen at the same time because it's not supposed to in its time and place. So I'm going to shut up because I know Zeba is excited to get on with her questions.
Well, with the questions, but the one thing I do want everybody to know, and I think Nargis, you illustrate it perfectly. If you want something done well, ask a mama to do it, because we will make sure that it happens. So thank you for we can do really hard. If you can push a baby out, girl, let's just be honest. We can do anything. I can grow a child, push it out, get dinner on the table, make sure my deadlines are here. Guess what? We can do anything. So thank you for representing us in the media world. And I know you're used to asking the questions, but we're going to put a minute on the clock right now, Joe, if you can do that. And guess what? We're going to be asking you the questions. So,
well, we've been doing that, but now this is just rapid fire questions.
This is going to be rapid fire, rapid fire, rapid fire. Okay, so what is your favorite word as a reporter?
Writing.
Ooh, I love that. What is your most used emoji?
Oh, the crying face, the crying laughing face.
The crying laughing face. If you could change your name is beautiful. And if you can change your name, what would that name be?
Nancy.
Oh, we're
Nancy Drew fan. Yes, that's why.
Nancy Drew.
But you're Bengali, so you should have like a Palonam and then like a name that's like another name, right?
You're using a
I don't use that.
per minute.
Oh, sorry, I'm using your minute. I'll shut up.
Okay, what's the one thing your mother or father taught you that has completely changed your life?
Go for it.
Oh, I love it. And what is one of your favorite books? Because we love books here at Mommyingwhilemuslim. Give us a book suggestion.
There's so many, but Kite Runner is my all-time favorite.
Yes. I
were just talking
love
about how that one is a hard one.
that.
Excellent. You did it. I'm sorry I took up some of your seconds. But
We
yeah,
should take up
it
like
took up like
5
a few
seconds.
seconds. I'm so sorry. But no, seriously, Nargis, it's just Nargis. There's no other names?
So my Dachnam is Lipi, but no one calls me that since I came to the Americas. So when I was like 10 and visited Bangladesh, they would call me that. And I'm like, that's not my name. My name is Nargis. And they're like, totally, you don't know who you are, kid. But we just roll with it. So no one calls me that anymore. But it's so funny that you mentioned that because I was like, I do have a nickname. That's right.
You do. Of course you do. I'm like, you're Bengali. Of course you do. My mom was born and raised in Dhaka. So it's like, I know you do. That's awesome. But thank you so much for, inspiring us today, empowering our audience. I feel inspired, and I know like Zeba has a long list of to-dos for me because she wants me to fulfill all my potential like in the next 10 minutes. I'll slow her down, but keep writing, keep empowering our community and focusing on it. And, we hope to have you back on to see what awesome projects you're working on and want to offer ourselves for any community project that you're doing to elevate Muslim voices, because that is, like we said, our love language. Thank you so much for everything you do.
Thank you. I'm so inspired by talking to both of you as well. Thank you so much.
Awesome. You have a great weekend. Assalamu alaikum,
Thank
everybody,
you.
for listening. This episode of Mommyingwhilemuslim is sponsored by Guidance Residential. Join Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, president of Zaytuna College and Guidance Residential, for a live webinar on how Islamic home financing is providing a permissible path for Muslim Americans to finance their homes. Register for very limited online seats at gr.link/MWM_NCW_Hamza HAMZA_YUSUF.